Good afternoon and welcome to the big show, the live show we do here at the Post-Gazette every day at 5 o'clock. I am Paul Zeise, and of course, we've got, as always, a lot of different things we're going to get into because as the football season is winding down, there's a lot of other things that we can talk about, but there's also a lot of stuff football related. And of course, we had planned on leading with the playoffs and actually the quarterbacks in the playoffs. And I'm going to tell you this much right now. It actually probably, in so many ways, I think it probably is basically one of these situations where it actually works out very, very well. And the reason that it works out very, very well is because there is a little bit of quarterback news today with respect to the Steelers. Now, again, I don't know that I'd call it big news, but it is maybe a little bit different than what we've heard to this point. And that is that Russell Wilson, he was on Pat McAfee show today, and Russell Wilson basically said that he is going to, that him and the Steelers have begun to talk. They've begun to discuss a contract for next year. Now, again, I don't know, how everybody feels about Russell Wilson. I get it when we sit here and talk about, Russell Wilson. There's a feeling of, he's not that good. He's just sort of limited in what he can do. We've seen it this year. We don't necessarily need to see it again. But here's the reality, okay? And this is, again, what we talked about the other day. Give me an alternative. I personally think that the ceiling is higher. I personally think the ceiling is higher with respect to Justin Fields. But at the end of the day, I don't know how much higher. And if all the reports that we're reading that Arthur Smith is coming back, I think that Justin Fields would be wasted here again. I do. I think they wasted him this year. I think they had a whole season where they decided – Mike Tomlin decided this. He basically decided that he thought having a quarterback that could pass it like Russell Wilson gave them the best chance to win. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But the reason that he made that decision is because he is basically, he was definitely afraid of the idea that if you went with Justin Fields and he skidded or whatever, and maybe their playoff streak or the non-losing streak was in jeopardy. Going with Russell Wilson was the safe choice. Steelers can't afford to be safe anymore. They can't afford to make decisions based on just, this is the safe way to do it. They can't. And if you're going to do that, then guess what? You're going to be, held in a pattern that in many ways you're probably never going to get better. And you're probably never going to take it to the next level. You're probably never going to get where you want to go. And to me, this year that just passed was the year to kind of find out or figure out what it is that you have in Justin Fields. And they didn't do that. And so now you're stuck with an offseason where you have one guy that you kind of know what the ceiling is. I mean, let's face it. With Russell Wilson, there's a ceiling. What's the ceiling? Well, it's probably 9-10 wins and losing first round of the playoffs, depending on who you play against. Because, again, there are two ways to look at it. One is, Russell Wilson is probably your best option just based on what's out there. Two is, where does Russell Wilson fit in the grand scheme of the AFC, just say, in quarterback play? Well, I mean, if you go through it and you look at it, I mean, really, obviously, there's the 3 or 4 big ones: Burrow, Allen, Jackson, and Mahomes. Those 4 guys are the 4 big ones, right? I think the kid that's in Houston, C.J. Stroud, is better. Bo Nix probably is better. Justin Herbert is better. Regardless of what you think about him because he had a bad playoff game, Justin Herbert is better. That's 7 right there. I think I would take Trevor Lawrence over Russell Wilson, to be honest, because I think if he was in the right system, he would probably be better than Russell Wilson. So to me, we're looking at this, and Drake May. I mean, I'd probably rather have Drake May, even though he's a young guy and he's still got a ways to go. I think Drake May is probably a better fit. I'd take Russell Wilson over Tua. I know there's a lot of people think I'm crazy when I say that. I think Tua I just don't think he's very good. I'll just leave it at that. I think he's very mentally soft, and I just don't think he's the kind of guy that's a leader. He gets hurt all the time. I think he's got two great receivers and, not much else to really hang his hat on. I just feel like he's a guy that's way overrated, Tua. So my point is probably Russell Wilson is somewhere in the neighborhood of 9th or 10th when it comes to AFC quarterbacks. But again, he's the best you got on the when you look at the grand scheme of who's available. And the thing about it is, you probably needed this year to figure out, is Justin Fields ever going to get to that level that makes him a chance to be a star? You had a chance to figure that out this year, but you just didn't. You decided to go the safe route. To me, if you're the Steelers, you needed to roll the dice and gamble a little bit and say, listen, the upside with this Justin Fields is higher. So even if we lose one game along the road or one or whatever, at the end of the day, what's the worst that could have happened? You lose 5 in a row? I'm just saying, maybe by the end of the year, you'll figure it out. And you figure it out that, boy, we have something in this Justin Fields, or we probably don't have something. And that makes it very much easier to go forward, and figure out what it is that you need at quarterback. But to me, people that are upset about the fact that the Steelers are likely to come back with Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields, they're your best options right now. And that's why this year was so critical. What happened this year was so critical to figuring out the future of your quarterback spot. And guess what? You need another year now where you're going to just basically have a bridge option and try and figure out how you can, get through to your quarterback of the future. Now, maybe it's still Justin Fields. I don't know. But if it is, if you want that to be the case, then you got to move on from Russell Wilson, period. You got to move on from him. Because if you sign him to a deal, if you're Justin Fields, are you signing here? Probably not. You're probably going to go find a place where you have a better chance to start. Period. Now, you look at the quarterbacks, again, that are left playing, right? And I think when you go through the quarterbacks that are left playing, you've got Jalen Hurts, Jayden Daniels, you've got Mahomes, and you got Josh Allen. You know what all of them have in common? The ability to run the football. With Mahomes, they don't run nearly as much, but he can still take it and tuck it and run for 15, 20 yards at a time, maybe sometimes even more than that, right? They obviously protect him a little bit more than the other three, but at the end of the day, what makes Mahomes the ultimate weapon over the last 6 or 7 years is that he drops back the pass, you cover everything well, you cover everything, really well down the field, and then he takes off and he runs for 20 yards. And I think that is something that is sort of the way of the NFL. I mean, if you look at sort of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, I mean, there are very, very few left that are like Justin Herbert, and even he can run a little bit, but are like Justin Herbert, where he's just a straight drop back passer that doesn't do a whole lot with his legs. That's what really has made a lot of those teams that are still playing dangerous. And again, I look at what the Commanders did, and they look at what they did. They drafted this rookie quarterback, right? They drafted a guy who basically is a little bit raw as an actual quarterback, but is an incredible talent. An incredible talent. And they basically said this: we're going to hire Cliff Kingsbury, who's a really innovative, aggressive offensive coordinator, and we're going to let him build we're going to let him build an offense around, Jayden Daniels' skill set. And as the season goes on, we're going to let Jayden Daniels pass it a little bit more, throw it a little bit more from the pocket. But for the most part, when they started this year, they had a whole bunch of different quarterback runs and read options and did all kinds of crazy stuff. That's what the Steelers have to do with respect to Justin Fields. See, one of the things about the Steelers that hold them back is that they have an antiquated way of looking at the NFL. I mean, it starts with the head coach, but at the end of the day, the head coach, he basically fits into the organizational philosophy. That's what holds the Steelers back. There's not this traditional method that they want it to be, where you can, where the Steelers can basically dial up, a bunch of running plays and do things the way they used to do them in the 70s, and say that this is going to work, because it's not. They have to be creative. This has to be the off season where the Steelers basically say, you know what, we're going to throw some of the things that we've done for 60 years. We're going to throw them out the window. And we're going to try and become creative. Join the NFL as it's played now. Not as it is, not as when it was when Chuck Noll was around and Dan Rooney was around. And, that's when we won all those titles and stuff. No. It's not how it works. Sorry. These teams are playing a different game than the Steelers. And so, again, when you look at the free agent list of quarterbacks, there isn't anybody on the list that's better than, Fields and Wilson. At this point, I mean, unless you, believe in Sam Darnold, which I'm sorry, I think we saw who Sam Darnold was in the two biggest games of the year at the end of the year here. He remembered who he was. But my point is, if you're going to pick between Wilson and Fields, if you go with Wilson again, right, you get everything you deserve. And you know what? It wouldn't shock me if Mike Tomlin's precious non-losing streaks came to an end if you go with Russell Wilson. I say you go with the guy that has the upside to get you where you want to go. Not saying that Justin Fields is a superstar. I'm saying he's got superstar ability, and maybe if you hire an offensive coordinator that knows how to use him, and I'm not saying he becomes Jayden Daniels, but all of a sudden the Steelers' offense is a hell of a lot more difficult to deal with. That's all I'm saying when it comes to this. So if you're putting, if you're the Steelers and you're putting your eggs in Russell Wilson's basket again, guess what? You deserve everything you get. You need to go with Fields next year. You need to go and tell Arthur Smith to get on with his life's work and go find a guy like Cliff Kingsbury to be your offensive coordinator. Somebody who understands modern day offense and who's innovative and who's got energy and all the other stuff that the Steelers really, quite frankly, have lacked. Can you hear me? We've got a special guest, Noah Hiles. Can you hear me, Noah?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, I can, which is a welcome change, because sometimes when we bring people in, I'll ask you this. You know what? Noah obviously writes for the Post-Gazette, but I'll ask you this. If you're looking at the free agent list of quarterbacks, there's nobody really that's that exciting, right? So right. If you are the Steelers, and I'm gonna make you, the king of the Steelers for one day here, do you go with Russell Wilson, who probably is a little bit more of a sure bet? I think has a ceiling, but probably also has a little bit of a floor. You've seen what it's capable of, which is probably not a whole lot in the playoffs when you start playing really good teams. Or do you roll the dice and say, we're going to go out and hire somebody who's going to try and get the most out of Justin Fields?
I would go with Fields. I just think that, one, the team wasn't playing bad when they had him. They beat a couple of playoff teams with him. So I feel like that gets lost in the weeds. And two, you just look, I feel like he kind of suits how this team's built, right? Unless they go out and get a whole bunch of playmakers, you're not going to have a great passing attack. I mean, it doesn't matter how great your quarterback is. If you have guys that aren't open and you don't have an OC that can scheme them open, it doesn't matter. Obviously, Fields has his areas of weakness, but he has strengths. And I think at this point in his career, he has more strengths than Russell Wilson. I think he has better pocket awareness. He's definitely more mobile. And the running factor, I think, brings a different element that not many offenses have, even ones with mobile quarterbacks. I think that, looking at his options, if he were to go elsewhere, he would be playing for a team that's of much lower caliber, or he'd be playing in a situation where he's a placeholder. He's warming up a spot to be, that would eventually go to someone who's a first-round pick. He doesn't want that. This would be the best opportunity, I think, for him, which would allow the Steelers to get him probably at a cheaper rate than elsewhere. So I think you would roll the dice. You'd be best off if you're the Steelers rolling the dice and going with Fields again.
No, absolutely. Let me throw this out to you, and then we'll get to the Pirates. But let me just throw this out to you because I don't think I am crazy, but I don't know that I'm crazy on this one. I'm going to give you some of these free agent quarterbacks. You tell me whether you'd rather have the Steelers duo, either of the or the guy I throw out. Okay.
Okay.
Darnold.
No.
So you'd rather have the Steelers guys?
I mean, he's going to cost too much money, and I think we saw what Sam Darnold's true colors were in the last 2 games of the year.
Zach Wilson.
No.
Trey Lance.
I wouldn't hate Trey Lance being the backup to Justin Fields, but I don't want Trey Lance to be a starter.
That is actually an idea that I haven't even come up with there, or I haven't even thought about. Justin Fields is starter, Trey Lance is the backup. Similar skill sets. Okay, there's one that you might think about. Okay, how about Jacoby Brissett?
Again, cool with him being the backup. I mean, I think he's one of the more reliable backups in the NFL, but if he's your starter, you're not a serious playoff team.
Marcus Mariota.
Same thing I said for Brissett.
Drew Lock.
I mean, he's a backup on a bad team. So, yeah, no, I'm good.
Jarrett Stidham. I mean, this is where we're getting to, man.
I heard Alliance 412 just reached out for him to back up Eli Holstein.
Right. I mean, come on, man. I'll give you one more, and it's intriguing because, again, I think he's got the highest upside, but I also think he's got the highest risk and also the highest reward and highest risk. Jameis Winston.
I'm surprised you didn't throw Aaron Rodgers out there.
Well, he's not a free agent, so he would have to be a trade or whatever. They'd have to cut him, right?
Yeah, but no, I mean, if they're going to be bad, then I would like them to have Jameis because Jameis is the most entertaining bad quarterback that's ever played football. But
yes,
I'd prefer them not be bad personally.
Well, that's what I didn't understand for with respect to the Browns. You were at least entertaining when he was playing. Right. I mean, and you ended up, and I get what they did. They tried to figure out what they have in the Pitt fan favorite, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. they had to figure that out, and that's what they were trying to do. But, boy, they became a lot less interesting when he wasn't playing anymore. So, okay, of course, you cover the Pirates for us, and you were at the Piratesfest this weekend. It seemed like there was some interesting interaction with the general manager, and so who actually spoke? Was it Travis Williams and Ben Cherington?
It was those two plus Derek Shelton. All 3 of them were up on stage for about 40 minutes. It was, Ask Pirates Management was the name of the event, and it was. I found it really interesting. They had pre-submitted questions, and then they did live audience questions as well, and I'll give them credit. They didn't really censor it very much. They did not shy away from, tough questions, the hardball stuff.
Bob Nutting wasn't there, was he?
He was at the event. He was not on stage for Ask Pirates Management.
Okay, so he was actually there. That's good.
Yes.
What were some of your impressions? Basically, I know what a lot of fans are thinking about, but what were some of your impressions of the answers that they got, or what were some of the general themes of things that were said?
I mean, my biggest impression as someone who covers the team is, I feel like a lot of frustrated fans who are always on social media coming after reporters, ask the tough questions. It's like, well, these are the answers we've already given you. Everything that was said that session has been written by me, by Andrew Destin, by other people who cover the team. They were just kind of reiterating it to the fans. And just because you don't like those answers doesn't mean that that's not the answer you're getting. And so, yeah, I think there were some frustrated people there. I also think, there were some people who were there for different reasons. They were happy, they were just Pirate fans. But I mean, some valid points were brought up. Someone asked Ben Cherington why he hasn't signed a multi-year free agent, which I think is a very relevant thing to highlight. It's we're going on year 6 with him here, and the last multi-year external free agent the Pirates have signed was Daniel Hudson, who was before Cherington's tenure. Granted, he signed extensions for guys, but that's a problem. You've got to be able to bring in talent on a multi-year basis externally, and it can't just come through trade. So I thought that stood out, that was asked. They asked why Nutting wasn't there, which I thought was an interesting question. They asked a lot of different things that I feel like a large portion of the fan base is concerned about. And while, I'm not confident they got answers that made them happy, I do think it was productive in the sense where some frustrated people got some stuff off their chest and they at least know that they've been heard, because I think some portion of the fan base felt like they were unheard or unnoticed.
Do you think that there is at least some semblance of a sense of urgency, the fact that the clock is ticking on Paul Skeens, and even though there's 4 or 5 more years, whatever, I mean, to try and capitalize on having him at the top of your rotation and building a team that you can actually maybe, utilize him in, playoffs and everything else. Do you think that there's at least some semblance of, hey, we've got a window and we understand that?
I don't know if Paul Skeens being on the roster changes how much the Pirates want to win, regardless. I think that they would answer it would be, regardless if they had Paul Skeens or didn't have Paul Skeens, they would want to be a competitive team at this point in their regime. And Paul obviously plays a huge factor in this, but, they're not, I don't think their mentality is we have to go all in these next couple of years because once he's gone, our chances are over. I think that this organization views it where, yeah, we have a great chance of winning with Paul Skeens, but they also believe in the wave of talent that will come after Paul Skeens. And I don't know if that's the best way to do things. Simple logic would tell me, maybe lean in more when you've got one of the best players in the world on a rookie deal. But I think that every move that they've made tells me that they're still going with the sustainability strategy. They're trying to build something where they can be in late July and have a chance to buy at the deadline rather than sell. They want what happened last year to be the bare minimum, which, isn't great, but rather than going all in and potentially stalling progress for after Skeens' inevitable departure.
Looking at what they've done since the end of the season, Noah, and here's a question I would ask you. Knowing and seeing what they've done since the end of the season, have they made any moves that upgrade the roster, number one? And number two, are they a better team today than they were, October 3rd?
I think they are a little better, yes. I don't know if they're playoff worthy. I think they're going to be better for a couple of reasons. One, I just think the starting pitching is going to be better because you get a full year of Paul Skeens. And while Jared Jones and Mitch Keller and Bailey Falter, I think those guys are going to be relatively similar to what we saw last year. Jones probably a little better. The back end guys of that rotation, you're not going to have, a Domingo Germán or a Jake Woodford or a Marco Gonzalez or a Martin Perez starting games for you. You're going to have top 100 prospects coming up and starting games in the back end. You get Johan Oviedo back. Even a guy like Mike Burrows, I think, is a better option than a lot of those names. The only real arm that they're losing from that group is Luis Ortiz, and I think that he'll be replaced in production by Bubba Chandler. So I think that group will be better. The bullpen's a concern. But at the end of the day, I think the bullpen really comes down to how good can David Bednar be? If David Bednar can be the player he was for his first 3 years in Pittsburgh, the bullpen's going to be fine. It's not going to be a weapon like they thought it was going to be at this time last year, but it won't be a liability. They'll be able to win more games simply because the starting pitching is better and they have a reliable closer, something they were missing last year. The lineup is interesting. Is it better? I think a little bit, simply because they didn't lose any of their good bats from last year. I think they did upgrade offensively at first base. I don't think they upgraded enough, but I think Spencer Horwitz will be a better offensive first baseman than Rowdy Tellez. They still need to upgrade, though. They need a right fielder. They can't go into spring training with the platoon of Billy Cook, Josh Palacios, and Jack Sawinski. They need something a little bit more proven there. I think they upgrade in center field by just having O'Neal Cruz there for a full season. Brian Reynolds is Brian Reynolds. And their infield, offensively, like I said, get a little bit better at first base. I think their offense at catcher will be fine with what they have with Barton, Endy Rodriguez there, and maybe Henry Davis. Nick Gonzalez is Nick Gonzalez. And if you can keep Brian Hayes healthy, or if you can get Jared Triolo to take the next step, you have a decent team. But the problem is, Paul, I said the word if about a dozen times, and hope isn't a strategy. So I think they'll be better. I think that the likely scenario here is, though, we're going to get to October and we're going to look back at this offseason and say only if they did a little bit more, they could have been playing playoff baseball, which is something we said last October.
Yeah, let me just throw some things out. Number one, I've read some rumblings that Brian Reynolds might play some first this year. Does that sound like something that could happen with him?
A little bit. I think there was a better chance of him being a regular guy at first base if the market was different and they didn't acquire Horowitz. I mean, Horowitz is the first baseman of the future. But depending on how he platoons, if he's a guy who doesn't hit lefties well, you can play Reynolds there against lefties because he's a switch hitter, and that gives you your other first baseman. And, if Horowitz doesn't pan out, or maybe Nick Gonzalez goes down, you move Horowitz to second base, or maybe Horowitz ends up being the everyday right fielder. There's chances. I would say we see Reynolds there a little bit. I wouldn't say a ton, but I do think we'll see him there some. I think Reynolds' future with this organization is primarily as an outfielder and then as a designated hitter later in his career.
Is Isaiah Kiner Falefa, is he good enough to be an everyday guy at shortstop?
He's been it before. He grades of all the positions he plays, and he plays pretty much everywhere. The only positions where he doesn't grade incredibly well are catcher, which is what he came up as, and shortstop. Now, he was an everyday shortstop for the Yankees for a little bit, so he can do it. But the Pirates would be better served finding someone else there for a lot of reasons. One, because I think Kiner Falefa is way more valuable as a super utility guy. That's why they acquired him. And two, I mean, he's on the last year of his deal, and I don't think you're going to want to re-sign this guy to be your everyday shortstop next year, considering what his age and his price for this team. So they need to find a better answer for the long term. And that could be Lawler Piguero. If he can learn how to hit in AAA, then he might be their everyday shortstop. Maybe they get that with Nick York, or move Nick Gonzalez over, or Jared Triolo, if one of those guys can prove to be adequate defensively and swing a consistent bat. But yeah, I think Kiner Falefa will be fine for what they have him there to be now, but I don't anticipate him being the everyday shortstop by the end of the season.
Last one, then we'll let you get out of here, is the annual Henry Hank Davis question. What is going to become of him this year?
We won't know until he shows us he can hit. If he can't swing a bat consistently at the major leagues, there's no use in trying to figure out what his position of the future is. If he can hit, they'll find a spot for him. If it's at DH, if it's in right field, if it's behind the plate, they'll figure it out. Because if he swings a great bat and he's hitting the ball better than Andy Rodriguez or Joey Bart, then he should be your everyday catcher. Or you should start transitioning him into DH if those guys are swinging the bat well. Because that's why you drafted him. You didn't draft him for his glove first overall. You drafted him because he was the best college bat in the draft. But he's got to do that. He hasn't showed that. He's showed that he could be a really good AAA hitter, but we haven't seen that translate to the highest level yet. And if we don't see it this year, I don't know what you do with him.
Well, we certainly appreciate you jumping on with us, Noah. Hopefully we can do it throughout the year here, and we'll get you on the big show, and you can break it down, and hopefully we'll have something exciting to talk about with the Pirates this year. I have serious questions about that, but if not, we'll always make it entertaining, right?
That's one thing I don't have doubts about. We can make it entertaining, Paul. Thanks for
all right, buddy. So thanks for jumping on, man. That is Noah Hiles. He obviously does a great job covering the Pirates, and again, this weekend was Piratesfest. People that are speaking of, we talk about the Steelers and the Penguins, the Pirates. All three of the teams here in Pittsburgh, they all seem to be stuck in some place where they're just kind of okay with where they're at, as opposed to thinking about how to get to the next level or get to the next place. Now, with the Penguins, again, it's a loyalty factor when it comes to the 3 stars. I get it. They're trying to squeeze every ounce of it out. But if this year doesn't convince you that it's over, I don't know what will. To me, this Penguins team, they need to really kind of pull some things apart and start not over, but the idea that somehow, you don't want to rebuild with Sidney Crosby. It's not fair to him. But guess what? If 4 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, you had made the decision that you're going to move on from the band that had won some Stanley Cups, you'd probably be rebuilt by now, and he'd be playing with a good young team that has a chance to win over the next year or two. But again, it's more important to go, to get your 94 points or 95 points, get the 8th seed in the playoffs, and claim you're a playoff team that's close. It's more important for the Penguins to do that than it is to blow it up, start it over, get it going again, and give yourself a chance to really get to where you go. Same thing with the Steelers. That's why they won't move on from Mike Tomlin. Forget about every other thing that, we've only had 3 coaches since 1970 or 69 or whatever. And, it's just the way we do things. And if you make the playoffs, you have a chance. And I can't, in my mind, give all that stuff is nonsense. It really speaks to really what is the heart of the issue with the Steelers organization. And that is they are so afraid. They are so afraid to take a little step back. They'd rather basically just be this team that does the same thing every year, year after year after year after year, than maybe take a little step back so they can go forward. So to me, I think that, it's the same thing with the Pirates. They're not going to be bold. They're not going to recognize that, hey, we've got this Paul Skeens, who's the best pitcher in baseball. We've got him, for 4 years or whatever. We've got to try and take a shot for the next 4 years. We'll worry about paying for it after the 4 years are over. But what we're going to try and do is get into a place where we actually have a chance to get better and get over the top. And I'll tell you the other thing. I get it. The cable deal blowing up and everything that went down with Pittsburgh Sportsnet, I get it. And it cost the Pirates a lot of money. I've heard the number up $30-35 million maybe. I don't know if it's been that. I don't know if it cost them that much, just from the standpoint of I don't know that their deal was that much, but they certainly lost some money. You know how you make money? Selling a bunch of tickets. That's how you make it up. And the only way you sell tickets is by putting a team out there that night after night after night has a chance to compete. That's the biggest thing. You don't have a chance to compete. And I think that if you don't, you're not going to sell tickets. It's just going to be kind of a ridiculous season if we're talking about the Pirates collapsing again, or the Pirates, not contending like they should, especially in their division. Cardinals are down, Brewers are kind of okay. Cubs are kind of okay. Reds are not that much better than the Pirates. It's not a hard division to win. It really isn't a hard division to win if you're committed to actually putting a team out there that gives you a chance to win. At least in the Steelers case, you can say, well, we got the Ravens in our division, so it's a hard division to win right now because the Ravens have Lamar Jackson. Even at that should be, to be honest, the reason why the Steelers are bold. They should take a look at the Ravens and say, they've got a really dynamic quarterback. They've got a really, really dynamic quarterback, and they have a chance to win. Period. And the only way we're going to beat them is by being bold and innovative and everything else. And I'm going to tell you that's what it comes down to with the Steelers. You're chasing the Ravens. Be bold. Be innovative. Go for it. Go for it. And if you're not going to do that, you're wasting all of our time this offseason. You really are. I think that's really the toughest part about all of this stuff is you're wasting our time. Okay? If you're coming back with Arthur Smith and you're coming back with Russell Wilson and, okay, maybe you move on from Dan Moore, but you have Broderick Jones at left tackle. And again, think about trading one or two of your stars on defense, using the money to get a legitimate cornerback option next to Joey Porter, go and get a legitimate receiver next to George Pickens, right? Build an offense that's built to be aggressive and creative and innovative. And if you can't do that, you're not going to catch up to the Ravens the next couple of years. And quite frankly, if you look at what happened, what next year could bring, it's probably going to be another 9 or 10 win season, and that's it. And so if that's good enough, I guess that's good enough. Interesting enough, and I'll get out of here on this, Joey Porter Jr. How many of you watched the Hard Knocks with the AFC North? Now, I'll say this. The Hard Knocks, when it first came out way back when, the first few seasons were fantastic. Then it became a little bit cliche, and also these teams and coaches started having too much control over what actually got broadcast, so you really didn't get the insider stuff that made that show good. There was a lot about that show that was really good at one point, but that show went way downhill to the point where it was almost dreck for a while. This AFC North series, though, was not terrible. Now, they didn't give you a lot of insider stuff, but it was not terrible in that I thought it did a pretty good job of chronicling the AFC North teams and kind of giving you a little bit of an inside look. But, they were talking about the exit interviews for the Steelers, obviously, because their season's over. The exit interviews, right? And it was one of those things where they basically, first started with the whole, the whole group, and Mike Tomlin, talking about how, I basically don't, I don't. What was his phrase? Something to the effect of, I don't look back. What's done is done. There's not much to change. All this other stuff, and it's where we're at. There's not a whole lot that you can talk about, and so it's a waste of energy to reflect and look back and all this other stuff. But then they went down and they broke it down into the rooms. And I thought it was really interesting. They had Grady Brown, the defensive backs coach, talking to Joey Porter Jr. And one of the things he said, which I thought was real interesting, was he said, when it comes to our group, there's a little too much my bad. You make a mistake, my bad. A little too much of that. A little too much of that kind of thing. And Joey Porter agreed and said, yeah, and Grady Brown said, I mean, it's good that you have accountability, but at some point you got to stop making mistakes. I thought that was really insightful because that tells you a whole lot about what some of the issue was, not just back with Joey Porter, but back there with the entire secondary. So they made too many mistakes. It wasn't about, necessarily 100% about their lack of ability. They just made too many mistakes. And then Joey Porter said, yeah, this offseason I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to get better at this and try and become a better player. You're gonna not recognize me because I'm going to work all offseason. When I come back, I'm going to be completely different. I mean, he said all the right things. But the reality is, I mean, Joey Porter is sort of an island out there by himself. He needs to have somebody on the other side that can actually play. And I think the Steelers need that, and they know they need that. That's really what it comes down to. The Steelers need help at corner. They need somebody else who is able to, cover. They need to be able to, use some of those other guys, I just call them, nameless, faceless guys. They need to be able to use some of those guys as the fourth corner or the nickel corner or the slot corner, but not as one of the top two corners. And the reality is this team had one corner. I mean, if you want to tell me you moved Dante Jackson to, swing corner or the fourth corner or the fifth corner, okay, I'll listen to that. But when he's your second corner, you're not very good back there. You're just not. I just don't think he was that good. And I don't think the Steelers, they're going to spend a lot of energy talking about quarterbacks again. I don't think there's a lot of movement on quarterback just because there's nowhere to go. Maybe one of these guys like, I don't know, does Kyler Murray excite you or Dak Prescott? Maybe one of those guys comes available via trade, but I don't even think that's going to happen. I don't think those guys are going to become available for the Steelers. And so to me, that everybody's going to spend a lot of time focused on talking about the Steelers. Quarterback spot. But cornerback spot is the more important one. And I think Joey Porter can get better, and I think he will get better. But he's got to continue to, reflect on some of the things that he does that made him vulnerable. Most, specifically the grabbing and the clutching and the pulling guys down and holding and all the stuff he doesn't do very well. He did not do very well at times at covering without being ultra physical, and that leading him to getting penalties. And you can't get penalties back there because you get penalties back there, it generally means it's going to lead to touchdowns for the other team on the other end. You get penalties, it extends drives, drives that go into, enemy territory. So anyway, we've got to get moving on here, and we'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks for joining. We always have a good time. We'll start to really take a look at the conference championship games. A lot to break down in both matchups. We'll do that tomorrow.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.